I'm waving bye to Stacy here. She's heading out. Oh yeah, why don't you here? This is the internet. So
I think we're on.
you can. I know that's all right. Take the book. That's David Badia's book. In case you didn't see the last segment, if you haven't, you can certainly watch
Absolute
that as
clown
well.
show here today.
It is.
This is like the final minute of the game last night.
It is, and it's actually been a fun show with Jamarcus Shepard and David Badia, but also a very fun evening, at least from a Purdue perspective. The Boilermakers win 69-64 in Bloomington, the 11th time Purdue has won since that building's opened. And you've been down there many times, and it wasn't there were not a lot of style points last night for Purdue, certainly, but an important win nonetheless.
Yeah, when you look at Purdue's performance last night, it was a big win in which Purdue did very little of what it had to do coming in, at least when you look at the game in advance of it. Hey, here are the things Purdue has to do. They have to make shots, they have to make free throws, they have to not turn the ball over, they have to limit offensive rebounds, they have to limit Thomas Bryant. Purdue did none of those things.
Yeah.
They shot really poorly. It was the bottoming out from a three-point range that hasn't come all year, especially in a game like this. Purdue had been shooting 45% from three-point range on the road. They've been shooting free throws really well. They didn't do that.
Yeah.
They were 71%, I think. They missed some important ones in the last couple minutes. Thomas Bryant gets 23, played really well at the offensive end. Purdue turned the ball over more than it would have liked. Purdue gave up way too many second chance points relative to what it felt it could, and Purdue won anyway. Normally, when you don't do the things you need to do to win a game, especially in an environment like that, 0 times 0 equals 0, and you lose the game. In this case, the impressive part of it lied in the unimpressive, if that makes any sense. The stuff Purdue didn't do right made this an impressive win because Purdue still found a way at the end, and that's what they've done the last two games here in very imposing environments and very big games. Maryland, they flat out just stole it.
Yeah.
They led for 59 seconds. The only two that mattered were the final two. And in Bloomington, this was an ugly game that Purdue figured it was going to have to score a lot of points to win, and didn't. It just kind of found a way to get it done, and that's where this has been impressive lately. It's been this almost survival instinct by Purdue in these situations where it didn't have that before.
Yeah. Vince Edwards, obviously, tied a career high last night, 26 points, and without him, Purdue would have been in big trouble. But what do you make of that? I mean, he was terrific in all facets of the game, really. But is this just a sign of it was his time, his day, or how do you view it?
It's just, this is the player he is.
Yeah.
He just hasn't always played like it this year. I thought at the end of last year he was really coming into his own as kind of that, I always use the word alpha. I thought he was becoming that guy. He's been really inconsistent this year, especially on the road. Why that is, I'm not really sure. He always talks about when he's aggressive, he's good, which leads to the question of why aren't you always aggressive? I know there's a certain deference that everyone has to pay to Caleb Swanigan, the force of nature he's been this season.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know what Caleb Swanigan's year has meant to everyone else developing around him, because he's been such this imposing, dominant, consistent figure that I don't know if everybody else kind of falls in line sometimes and just kind of orbits him or what, but there have been a lot of games this year where Vincent Edwards has just kind of blended in when he's too good a player to blend in. Last night he obviously broke out, and you didn't see it coming because he hadn't been scoring on the road. The Maryland game was the first scoreless game of his career. But this is what he's capable of.
We saw it against Northwestern earlier.
We saw it against North, but on the road he hadn't been scoring.
Yeah, correct.
But he is a really good player. I've always called him Purdue's offensive equilibrium. Now, Carson Edwards, to some extent, has offset that a little bit because he can get to the basket, he can do some other stuff. But Vincent Edwards is so important to this team's overall mix offensively because he can shoot from the perimeter, he can post up, he can drive, he can score in transition, and he's a really good distributor, too. This is just what he's capable of, and it was bound to happen eventually. He was going to have this sort of game. You just didn't figure, based on his road results to this point, that it was going to happen against Indiana. But certainly Purdue needed it last night because he carried them to a win.
Yeah, Dakota Mathias obviously I think only had the 1 3. It was a big one in the second half. And yet I thought he also, which he's done much to my surprise, has developed in his career to being really, Dan Dockich called him the Big Ten's top defender. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it's good pub for him certainly. But he's, again, did some big things, I thought, defensively at crunch time last night to keep James Blackman at bay to some extent, but also to get the job done, and yet didn't do anything offensively.
He's been a really good, he's a great passer.
Yeah, and he did do that.
Stuff.
So,
He had a couple of turnovers that were a little uncharacteristic, but
No
he makes
question.
that pass to Caleb Swanigan for that 3-point play with a minute to go. That was the biggest field goal of the game, and that's not an easy pass to make. You got a guy coming in on Swanigan from the backside. That's not a simple pass to make. You trust Dakota Mathias to make that pass every single time. But to your point, he has become a really good, really reliable defensive player. You didn't know if you had that guy coming into this season. The whole purpose of Purdue tweaking its defensive philosophy to be more of a sagging defense to cut off the dribble was because you didn't know if any of those guys could be good defenders, let alone, standout defenders. Dakota Mathias has become a standout defender. I don't know if cautionary tale is the right word, but it's a great lesson for every player. Because if you just pay attention, if you just prepare, and if you just pay attention to details, you can be a good defensive player. Because when you look at the physical gifts you need to be a really good defensive player at this level, Dakota Mathias has none of them. None of them. I don't mean that as a slight to him. He would say the same damn thing probably.
Yeah.
But he works at it. He prepares. He studies his opponents. And that's what made Rafael Davis really good, too.
Yeah.
He just started committing himself to it. And when you see guys come into seasons saying, I want to be this type of defender, this is the role I want to fill in this team, but then they're not doing that basic stuff, it just boggles your mind that if you really want to do this, the answer is pretty simple. Just prepare, just try. And that's exactly what Dakota Mathias has done because he's a really conscientious, he's a really cerebral player, and he's a really, really, I don't know what the word is, but when you tell him he can't do something, he flips you the you-know-what, and he goes and does whatever he can to do it. And that's what's made him the player he is today, that sort of mindset and that sort of mentality.
Certainly last night's game, you got down to the wire and really the last minutes, a couple strange calls, if not problematic calls for Purdue, though Indiana fans may beg to differ on the double foul. But take us through that and what there's been some clarification on the fact that you can call it that way, and which they did, and they did call it the right way. Whether they made the correct call is another thing, but your view of that.
It is the rule, apparently.
Yeah.
And I think
which I didn't know.
We universally agree that it's a silly rule. It's
Yeah.
like if you're driving through an intersection and the light is red and green at the same time, you just pull all the cars off the road. It doesn't make any sense. That it has to be one thing or the other. It has to be either a charge or a block. You can't have both and then have both teams essentially penalized without there being any free throws. It is what it is in that sense. I thought the unfortunate part for Purdue was the fact that this sort of hijacked the narrative a little bit of the game, because this was a really big win for Purdue in which Purdue did a lot of very positive things at the end of the game to win this game, and suddenly everybody's talking about this after the game, when the reality was that if it was anything, I think most of us would agree it was a charge. Right, because Thomas Bryant puts his shoulder down, initiates the contact on Swanigan. Whether Swanigan's moving his feet or not is irrelevant. If Thomas Bryant initiated with his shoulder, that seems to me like a charge. I think a lot of people would agree with me. A lot of unbiased people would agree with me. If it is the charge, Thomas Bryant's gone. Purdue has the ball up 5 with less than a minute to go. The game is over.
Yeah.
Okay. If it is a block on Swanigan, then does Thomas Bryant get the continuation even though he traveled after Caleb Swanigan fell? Even if he does, that's 3 points when you ended up getting 2 points because you got free throws off the ensuing possession.
Yeah.
It's a 1-point net there. Purdue still has a lead going into the final minute. It's not like this cost Indiana the game. What it did was it just kind of stole the narrative from Purdue a little bit. It became this storyline that it seemed like the controversy factor was something one side of it was willing to play up, and the Purdue side of it didn't. Matt Painter always basically apologizes for the opponent, for beating the opponent. He always makes the quote-unquote excuses for the team his team just defeated. And sometimes maybe you wonder if he just wouldn't just trumpet the positive for his team. Yeah. Just talk about, hey, our team played great, this was wonderful. Don't come out and just talk about how many players IU didn't have, or Scotty Lindsey against Northwestern. It's almost like he respects other coaches so much, and that's admirable. But sometimes it comes off like he's kind of taking away a little bit from what his team did by, rationalizing things for the opponent. I mean, that's certainly an admirable quality, that he has so much respect for the profession and so much respect for his competition that he does that. But sometimes maybe it's just like, well, just trumpet everything positive Purdue did instead of talking about, the reasons that that team didn't beat your team.
Yeah, Matt Painter, certainly one of his biggest wins would be his fourth win in Assembly Hall, and a big win for the Boilermakers. So what's ahead? Obviously Wisconsin had the opportunity, Nebraska had the opportunity to beat Wisconsin last night, had them down to the last second, and Nigel Hayes hits a huge basket to deliver the Badgers. Does it really matter outside of having another Big Ten regular season championship? But Wisconsin may or may not lose two more games.
Yeah.
Purdue may not go through it undefeated. I mean, what does it matter?
Well, Wisconsin's clearly showing that they're going to survive these scares.
Yeah.
They've got a number of losable games coming up.
Yes, they do. Northwestern being one this weekend.
I wouldn't say Purdue's going to win every game they play the rest of
Yeah.
the way either, even though they've won a bunch of games in a row now. They've done it the last two by the absolute skin of their teeth. But I think for Purdue right now, what's done is done. I keep bringing this up, and I don't want to sound like I'm just beating a dead horse, but you really got to be kicking yourself here because your resume is a Big Ten championship resume. You've beaten Wisconsin, you've won at Ohio State, Michigan State, Indiana, and Maryland.
Yeah.
And you're probably not going to win the Big Ten. That is, I don't know.
Yeah.
They've got to just be tearing their figurative hair out because those are the games you have to win a Big Ten title, but you threw three of them back by losing at home to Minnesota, and then the games against Iowa and Nebraska on the road that if you played them again tomorrow, you win those games by double digits potentially. It's just there's that inconsistency for the first half of the Big Ten season that has really cost Purdue now. But, I mean, stranger things have happened. Wisconsin could lose two more
Oh,
times.
yeah, they got to play Maryland.
Purdue could catch up. It's entirely possible things work out for Purdue. But as of right now, Purdue is finding now what it needed in the first half of the Big Ten season, that ability to just that Wisconsin it factor that gets them through all those games. I think I said after the Nebraska game that Wisconsin plays like a team that's played in Final Fours in those situations, and Purdue plays like a team that's lost in bizarre overtime games in the first round 2 years in a row in the NCAA tournament. But Purdue's finding that now. They're getting through these situations that Wisconsin thrives in. But you just wonder, for Purdue's sake, if they're not too far behind now because of what happened in the first half of the season.
But Purdue clearly has things to play for and should achieve, and that would be the double bye in the Big Ten tournament. And the other question will be in terms of seeding, in the NCAA tournament, and we'll be talking to Jerry Palm, I'm sure, and others down the stretch. But Purdue's likely a 3 or 4 seed, it appears at this point. But there are some carrots there because you might have the opportunity to also play close to home in the NCAA tournament. I believe Milwaukee and Indianapolis are opportunities early on. So that's going to be a part of the storyline as well. Last question I have for you is, you've been to 3 great environments here, bam, 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 it seems like, with the Michigan State. Well, really 4 if you talk about Nebraska, too.
Yeah, that's not a bad environment.
Terrific
people don't think
environment.
of Nebraska that way, but
Yeah,
it is.
Nebraska. You got Michigan State, Nebraska, Maryland, and Indiana. Which was the most raucous? Was it last night?
It was probably last night, but Michigan State was pretty bad.
Yeah.
That was bloodlust if I've
Yeah.
ever seen it in an arena before. And you really have to give Caleb Swanigan a lot of credit.
Yeah.
Even looking back on it, more so than I would have said that night.
Yeah.
But when you look back on it, what he did in that environment, it was like it brought something out of him. It centered him. It gave him a composure that maybe he wouldn't have in just a more neutral environment. I think
Yeah.
that was a really special game that maybe didn't get the credit it deserved at the time. That was a really, really big time performance, not just by Swanigan, but his whole team.
Okay, well, Brian will be, I think, still planning to hit the road tonight to watch Sasha Stefanovic play Crown Point versus Valparaiso at Crown Point tonight. Of course, Sasha, Purdue's new, most recent commit to the class, this year's recruiting class, and we'll have a lot on the site with him tonight, next week, etc. So we'll look forward to that. We'll look forward to having next week's show, and that will be, we'll have Matt Rector's been good to bring up assistant coaches. We'll have another assistant coach for you to meet. It's possible, too, that Gene Cady coming back into town, though I think it will be the week of the 24th. He gave an excellent interview yesterday to Dan Dockich. If you get the chance to get on the internet and watch that or listen to that, it was very, very good. And we'll look forward to shows all the way through to the Big Ten tournament. as we race and make our way through what's been a very interesting basketball season. We want to thank our sponsors, Triple X, On the Hill but on the Level, a Purdue tradition since 1929. John Basham and the good folks at Basham Reynolds. I know he was grinning from ear to ear as a Purdue fan after the Boilermakers win last night. Hilton Garden Inn, when tomorrow's a big day, State HDI tonight. And State Farm agent Trent Johnson at trentismyagent.com. I want to thank Allie and Cammie, as always. Cammie does all the setup along with Gordon Jackson for this show, and we appreciate her positive attitude and all the things she does for us as well. We'll look forward to seeing you next week. That will be the 17th of February, 2 o'clock for Golden Black Live.